Hey everybody, Dave back with another Game of the Year candidate. This time we're looking at Shadow of War, a game that I was very much looking forward to and which was a really amazing and solid game, somewhat ruined by a lot of current trends in the AAA gaming industry today. In a way, it stands as the counterpoint to Battlefront 2, an awful game full of awful industry garbage. By contrast, Shadow of War is an amazing game full of awful industry garbage that makes it difficult to enjoy. Microtransactions in the form of loot boxes, shoehorned in multiplayer components, and a need to justify it all by creating endless grind for those who aren't willing to pony up the extra cash. But before we get to that, we need to take a look back at the game that made Shadow of War possible. Shadow of Mordor was one of the best games I'd played in ages. The combat seemed to have borrowed/stolen from the sterling example set by Rocksteady in the Arkham series of games. The world was open and vast and only felt a little empty in certain places. The skills at your disposal allowed you to genuinely take a varied approach to different situations, making both stealth and outright combat viable options, letting you take the approach you preferred rather than the one the designers wanted you to, something I haven't genuinely felt was an option outside the Dishonored series. On top of that, Shadow of Mordor's Nemesis system offered a refreshing take on enemy NPCs, creating consequences for the player's failure in certain enemies becoming stronger and harder to kill, even to the extent of being promoted and gaining followers if the player or even other NPCs were defeated by the enemy in question. I remember having a few nuisance enemies in Shadow of Mordor and one honest-to-God nemesis, someone I had a real grudge with and whose eventual defeat brought me a genuine sense of joy and accomplishment, and it was an NPC. An unscripted, randomly generated, organically grown enemy that no one specifically sat down and wrote. I've had other games present final bosses whose defeat had been built up, structured, polished, scripted, and presented as the climax of the game that I cared less about than this one freaking orc just dying. Combine all that with the fact that Shadow of Mordor was a single-player game. That was it. No online component, no competitive leaderboards, at least until the Test of Power DLC was released 4 months later. Full disclosure, I never played either the Test of Power or the Brightlord DLC, nor did the core game ever give me the indication that I needed to in order to get the whole story. It was the complete experience in itself, with DLC offering additional content for those that might want more, rather than feeling like a piece of the story that was being withheld from players. I'm looking at you, Battlefront 2. There were some amazing improvements made to the system in Shadow of War. Enemies would more frequently ambush the player rather than waiting for Talion to come to them. In addition, some orc captains would appear in conjunction with certain activities the player was engaged in, criticizing their technique or approach, making the game feel like it was actually watching what I was doing and responding. The first time a captain hits you with a throwing spear while you're trying to aim an arrow at someone else and tells you that only wusses use bows, it's an amazing reality-twisting moment. Unfortunately, Shadow of War falls into the trap of a lot of sequels, taking what was good about the first game and shoveling in a lot more of the same. By the 7th or 8th captain who interrupts your gameplay, you're less impressed and more annoyed. There were several later captains I faced that, in retrospect, would have been amazing moments if I hadn't already been so burned out with the constant surprises. An orc captain tackling me while I'm in stealth would have been a cool surprise, but when it comes as I'm sneaking my way to an objective I've been heading for after defeating a small army of orcs in a fight that was interrupted 4 times by captains who insisted on giving me their entire backstory before the fight could be allowed to resume, it's less awesome and more of a nuisance. In addition, and this might be my isolated bad luck, but the first 4 captains I killed in-game all came back from the dead. This is nothing new, it happened in Shadow of Mordor as well, slain orcs coming back with new scars and a few prosthetic bits. It made the game seem more personal, with one captain becoming a particular thorn in my side as he refused to stay dead, earning him a title along the lines of Gruntrax the Undying, or something like that. Frustrating, yes, but because it was that one orc, it started to feel like he personally had something against me, and he refused to let go of the grudge he bore the Tark who killed him. When it happens repeatedly and in such quick succession, though, it no longer feels special. It feels like tedious busy work, a game of undead whack-a-mole that never ends. This was the case with captains across the board in Shadow of War. They were so numerous and appeared so frequently that it became hard to feel like any encounter was special. In the beginning, some felt different, like a nobody orc who killed me and became something like Mornaz the Tark Slayer, only to work his way up through the ranks and become a major player in the armies of Sauron. And starting out, one could get the impression that this game really had something going for it in these seemingly personal captains. But by the time I made it to the 3rd map, I had lost track of how many Someone the Beastmasters and so the Poisoners I'd met, and I couldn't bring myself to care. Why have so many of these captains? That's where the loot box system comes in to ruin the game and my ability to enjoy it. On each new map, you face a new army, and that new army needs to be conquered, which is either done by grinding through gameplay, enslaving orc captain after orc captain until you more or less run the army, or by buying loot boxes to get orcs and then seeding the new army with these purchased commodities. And that's the problem. The Nemesis system worked by making the enemy seem unique and personal. By requiring the player to collect captains in such large numbers, Shadow of War eliminates any aspect of the personal and turns these potentially unique and interesting characters into nothing more than items in an inventory. I quickly stopped caring about the orcs I recruited, if you can call forcibly bending someone else's will to your own recruitment. I didn't care what their backstories were, what eccentricities they had, and any attachments I might have had to them, and focused instead on quantity. For the first map or so, I was having fun. The second map, though difficult to start over again facing a new entirely antagonistic army, was also enjoyable. By the third, I felt like I was being put through a lot of busy work. Incidentally, the maps play out like levels from a Mario game. There's the starting city, Jungle World, Ice World, and Fire World. Each populated with a lot of structures copy-pasted across the landscape to make the world feel larger. Eventually, the time I spent on the actual story, which viewed in itself had some really remarkable moments in it, took a backseat to the seemingly endless grind I was going through. It got so bad that the amazing moment when my character is betrayed by one of his own generals was entirely lost on me, because I had long since given up. I held on to the game for almost a month after I stopped playing it, meaning to go back, remembering some really cool moments and fun mechanics, but ultimately just feeling tired at the thought of descending back into Mordor for another hack and slash fest that would be ultimately interrupted by 3 unskippable monologues. In addition, the Nemesis system seemed focused on leveling up those orcs that had defeated my character in the past, leading to battles where I was almost killed by a nobody orc, but because there was a previously fought general in the battle, the orc I was fighting would vanish, replaced by the captain who only moments ago had been standing across the battlefield getting wailed on by some random orcs I had dominated and set loose in the scrum. And it wasn't a one-off. In fighting this orc, I had 4 near-death experiences at the hands of others, only to have the same captain teleport in for the killing blow. Sometimes from the top of a completely different tower. It broke the feeling that this was happening organically and left me feeling like I wasn't fighting a particular orc, but fighting the game's internal logic itself. Ultimately, what should have been the high point of this game now felt like nothing more exhilarating than checking an item off a list. Then there are all the smaller ways the microtransactions muddied my gameplay experience, such as taking up a third of the pause menu to tell me about daily deals and bonuses if I just give Warner Brothers my email address. Let's be clear. I'd sooner give my email address to the fictional Warner Brothers than WB Interactive, and those weird kids can probably send live sharks through email with their cartoon magic. The plot was good, if not as driving as the first game. In Shadow of Mordor, we were driven by revenge, a need to exact retribution for what was done to us and our families. Here, we're being driven by, kill the evil threat. It's a reasonable motivation, I just don't feel like it's as personal or as visceral as our goal in the last game. Combine that with Talion's constant arguing with Celebrimbor for no clear reason, something which frequently feels forced as a way of imparting added drama to their scenes together. And it feels hard to nail down what his motivation and vicariously ours as players is. The depersonalization of the campaign is further driven home by all the equipment you get in-game, another item that can be needlessly crammed into loot boxes. In Shadow of Mordor, we spent the entire game using our dead son's broken sword as a knife to stealth kill countless orcs. It was intensely personal, and rather than throwing it away 5 minutes in for a newer, shinier dagger, we simply upgraded it with mystic runes. It became personal, even more personal than it was. In Shadow of War, instead, we swap out gear every 4 or 5 minutes when we get a new drop that has slightly higher numbers than whatever it is we've got equipped now. Again, we have something intensely personal, our son's broken sword, discarded for a lot of impersonal loot drops that amount to a numbers game, leaving me with no more personal attachment to my dagger than to any of the thousands of guns I threw away in the Borderlands series. I'm not going to get into the multiplayer because I didn't touch it. I looked at the siege and defense activities in-game and felt no need to play any more of those against even bigger armies, and the pit fights are the worst example of mobile game mechanics invading a space in which they have no business solely for the purpose of giving WB Interactive another reason to sell you loot boxes. Incidentally, the B-roll Ben recorded for this video, thanks again buddy, is the first time I've ever seen someone's orc win in the pit fights. Everyone else I've talked to, with 2 exceptions, has only ever lost orcs in the pit fights. And those 2 exceptions had still only won once or twice, but lost an overwhelming number of orcs, even when those orcs were facing much weaker enemies. In the end, I feel like this was an amazing game, should have been an amazing game, that due to a lot of decisions at the publisher level was bogged down in a lot of tripe and corporate greed. Please, don't take my criticism as suggesting the game isn't good. It wouldn't be on this list if it wasn't good, Battlefront 2 being the exception due to its outstanding achievements in the field of suckage. And I even started this video saying, by contrast, Shadow of War is an amazing game full of awful industry garbage. I keep seeing what this game could have been if the developers and designers hadn't had to spend so much time building a whole system to both manage and justify the greed-laden junk that got shoved in. In the words of Miracle of Sound,
We still had a lot of fun. Please don't think this comes from hate. We bitch because we like you and we want you to be great.
Incidentally, links to the full song are in the description. I worry that this is what we have to look forward to. Amazing games that get ruined by a lot of publisher greed and an endless need for profits. Shadow of War is an amazing game that should have been a lock for Game of the Year. Instead, it's a nominee. But what are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments, like and subscribe. It's free and it helps us get eyes on these videos. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag LTRGOTY and let us know what you think should be considered for Game of the Year. And as always, you can email us at loottheroompod@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hunt the Wampus.